9 weeks into 2026, and here's what you need to know to stay up to date with what's shaping Greater Brisbane right now. From surprising housing shifts to construction cost warnings, a major Brisbane budget debate, and an unexpected diplomatic twist in the Redlands. This is the Greater Brisbane Overview, and I've also published separate breakdowns for Logan, Ipswich and Moreton Bay if you want the full local details for your area. This video is sponsored by YB Painting Services, and I'll tell you about the exclusive discount they have for viewers of the Brisbane Channel. But first, let's get updated. You may be surprised by where housing demand is heating up across Greater Brisbane. If you're looking for somewhere affordable to buy, brace yourself. As prices continue to rise, demand is concentrating more heavily in suburbs that were previously seen as less desirable, and that's accelerating price growth in those areas faster than the broader average. Recently, realestate.com.au ranked suburbs using what they call a hotness score, comparing a suburb's 12-month price growth with the surrounding area. Out of all suburbs and towns in Queensland, the second hottest for houses was Woodridge in Logan. For decades, there's been a stigma attached to Woodridge. Whether that's still relevant today is something I'll be exploring soon. But house prices there have increased by around 33% over the past year, pushing the median house price to well over $800,000. Kingston, right next door, saw around 30% growth and also landed in the top 10. Ipswich had 3 suburbs in the top 10 for houses, with growth rates even stronger than the Logan entries. The common thread is relative affordability. Most of the Greater Brisbane suburbs appearing in the top 10 remain well below the national capital city median, but that gap is closing. For units, several Greater Brisbane suburbs also ranked highly on the hotness list. But with Brisbane now holding the title of the Australian capital with the fewest homes available under $500,000, the idea of Brisbane as the affordable alternative is clearly no longer accurate. And none of this pressure is helped by what's happening in the construction sector. International project advisory firm WT has released a new Brisbane 2032 and Beyond report, warning that the project pipeline is massive, Olympic deadlines are fixed, and the industry is already tight. WT expects building cost escalation in Brisbane to rise to around 8% in 2027 and around 10% in 2028. For infrastructure projects, they're forecasting roughly 7% in 2027 and 8% in 2028. I didn't want to take one consultancy's forecast at face value, so I compared it with Ryder Levitt Bucknell's. Their numbers are lower, around 7% annual tender price growth through 2027 and 2028, but the direction is the same. Most forecasters agree escalation is likely to lift into the late 2020s. The disagreement is about how sharply. WT points to tight labour markets and projected workforce shortages as Olympics construction ramps up. If productivity reforms and staging don't offset that pressure, the risk is higher wages, higher pricing, and more expensive do-it-faster decisions. And that matters beyond the games. It affects how much capacity is left for housing and everything else happening across southeast Queensland at the same time. Staying with broader regional impacts, a quick road safety issue that's worth being aware of. In the first 7 weeks of this year, there have been around 340 lost load incidents on transurban operated motorways in Greater Brisbane, about 13% higher than the same period last year. The Gateway motorway accounts for roughly half of those incidents. The Logan motorway and airport link are also seeing significant numbers. Across the full 2025 calendar year, Transurban recorded nearly 2,500 lost load incidents, a 65% increase on the previous year. Most of this is preventable. Road operators are urging drivers to properly secure loads before departure, use ratchet straps or covers, and never attempt to retrieve debris yourself on a live motorway. Taking a few extra minutes before setting off could prevent a serious crash, and you don't want to be that guy that causes traffic to back up because you lost your load. There's also been a significant and controversial change to how racing is governed in Queensland. Amendments to the Racing Act 2002 have removed the requirement for Racing Queensland's board to include non-industry members. Previously, 4 of the 7 directors had to be independent. That requirement has now been removed. The board is expanding to 9 members, with 3 explicitly representing thoroughbred, harness and greyhound racing, and directors will now be allowed to own racehorses and greyhounds. These changes follow last year's Queensland Racing Review, which recommended transferring certain responsibilities, including post-racing welfare and aftercare, from the independent Queensland Racing Integrity Commission to Racing Queensland. Greens MP Michael Berkman and the Coalition for the Protection of Greyhounds have criticised the move, arguing it reduces independence and creates potential conflicts of interest. The government's position is that consolidating governance under Racing Queensland will improve clarity and accountability across the codes. The debate comes amid renewed scrutiny of the Kew Greyhound track, where advocacy groups say 27 greyhounds have been killed after racing since trials began in March 2025, including 2 in the past fortnight, Crazy George and Supreme Choice. They were seriously injured after racing at the Kew and were later euthanized. According to stewards' reports, both sustained significant leg injuries during or immediately after racing. This is likely to remain a live political issue, particularly given the ethical debate surrounding greyhound racing more broadly. One idea now being discussed that could potentially speed up housing delivery focuses on infrastructure and how it's funded and sequenced. A new report from Suburban Futures argues that one of the biggest constraints on new housing in southeast Queensland isn't zoning, it's infrastructure timing. Specifically trunk, water, sewer and energy connections. The report notes that average civil servicing costs per new lot are now around $180,000 before land or construction costs are added. And in some growth corridors, developments can sit waiting years for major trunk infrastructure to arrive, effectively slowing how quickly new homes can be delivered. The report proposes 2 main ideas. First, what it calls infrastructure islands. Precinct-scale water, wastewater and energy systems that allow early stages of development to operate independently rather than waiting 7 to 10 years for regional trunk connections. In their hypothetical SEQ case study, a 5,000 dwelling precinct could deliver its first 1,200 lots well before regional infrastructure arrives, then integrate into the broader network later. Second, a different financing model. They point to municipal utility districts, or MUDs, used in Texas in the States, where infrastructure is funded through long-term bonds repaid over time by future residents, rather than being fully capitalized upfront into lot prices. The argument is that this can lower initial purchase costs and allow growth to pay for itself without existing ratepayers subsidizing new areas. Bringing something like this to Queensland would require legislative change, and there are governance and accountability questions that would need careful scrutiny. But the broader idea is this: if infrastructure sequencing is slowing supply in growth corridors like Ripley, Flagstone, Caboolture West or Yarrabilba, then alternative delivery and funding models may need to be part of the housing conversation. It's a complex topic and one that likely deserves its own deep dive, but if speeding up housing supply is a priority, this is one of the ideas now entering the discussion. Before we move on, a quick shout out to the sponsor of this video, YB Painting Services, one of Queensland's leading painting providers. They recently won 2 first and 3 second place awards at the 2025 Master Painters Australia Queensland Awards. And when you see their professionalism and the quality of their workmanship, it's no surprise. With fixed pricing and a 5-year warranty on all their work, you can be sure there'll be no unpleasant surprises. Claim your 10% discount by scanning this QR code or the link in the video description. Now to Brisbane City Council's mid-year budget review, and as you'd expect, each side of the chamber is claiming very different things. The Schooner administration says the review confirms it has maintained a balanced budget, kept rates the lowest in southeast Queensland and reduced net debt, which is now projected to fall by a further $114 million to $3.43 billion, below the $4 billion budgeted figure. They also point to an almost $11.2 million decrease in expenditure since the June budget and say they've maintained an operating surplus as a buffer against rising costs. On service delivery, the administration highlights a 27% increase in bus patronage following the new bus network, metro bus rollout and 50-cent fares, a $4 million increase in footpath maintenance, almost 20% more asphalt laid, expanded mowing schedules, more mosquito spraying, longer immunisation clinic hours, and the rollout of 150,000 new green bins. They argue more than 80% of the $4 billion budget continues to be spent in the suburbs, while maintaining what they describe as the cheapest rates in the region. However, the opposition paints a very different picture. In a release titled Brisbane Cops Biggest Rates Paying in Australia, Labor points to new ABS data showing Brisbane recorded an 8.3% annual increase in rates, fees and charges to January, the highest of any capital city. Labor argues that while the administration talks about keeping rates low in a regional sense, Brisbane residents are still facing the sharpest year-on-year increase nationally. They also claim operational expenses are rising while staff and projects are being cut, leading to service backlogs. Meanwhile, Greens councillor Seal Chong-Wah has focused on what she describes as declining service delivery at the ground level.
Residents have done the right thing by calling up the hotline asking for footpath repairs or tree trims or intersection build-outs. They've kept their reference number and waited for updates. They've watched deadlines come and go and their jobs close without the job being done. I've seen a resident wait 2.5 years for a simple footpath repair request. The highest impact is felt by the people of Brisbane and obviously hitting people with less. People who rely on libraries and playgrounds to help raise their children, people who can't get a slot in rhyme time sessions after the council cut a quarter of these sessions. This LNP should not be proud of this budget.
So what do we make of this? There are really two separate debates happening. The first is about relative rates levels. The administration says Brisbane still has the lowest rates in southeast Queensland compared to neighbouring councils. Labor is focusing on the percentage increase over the past year compared to other capitals. Both can technically be true at the same time. A council can have comparatively lower base rates but still implement a higher annual increase. The second debate is about service delivery versus cost control. The administration highlights expanded mowing, road surfacing, mosquito control and increased bus usage. The opposition and Greens argue that residents are experiencing delays and backlogs in core services. As always, the lived experience in different suburbs may vary. What's clear is that the cost of living pressures are shaping the political framing on all sides. This budget review doesn't change rates, that happens in the annual budget, but it does give an indication of how the administration says it's tracking financially halfway through the year. And judging by the tone of all three responses, the debate over rates, debt and service standards is only going to intensify as we head towards the next full budget cycle. Another sign of ongoing transformation in Brisbane is a new development application lodged opposite the Gabba in Kangaroo Point. A development application has been lodged for a 22-storey mixed-use building at 492 Vulture Street and 85 Linton Street, currently an at-grade car park within Woolloongabba Priority Development Area. The proposal includes 106 apartments along with ground floor food and drink tenancies. Around 21% of the dwellings are proposed as affordable housing, and importantly they would be integrated throughout the building rather than separated out. The building would reach around 72 metres in height. The PDA guideline for this part of Vulture Street identifies a 20-storey limit, so the applicant is seeking approval for 2 additional storeys, arguing the site's location opposite the Gabba and close to the future Cross River Rail Woolloongabba station supports the extra height. One of the notable aspects of this proposal is modular construction. The developer is proposing to use prefabricated building components which can reduce construction time and potentially improve cost efficiency, something increasingly relevant given ongoing labour and material cost pressures. In a precinct that's already seeing significant transformation with the Cross River Rail Station and long-term planning around the Gabba Entertainment and Olympic legacy, this is another sign of continued densification around major transport infrastructure. Whether the additional height is supported will ultimately come down to the PDA assessment process. To put the height question in context, this part of Vulture Street sits within the Wollongabba PDA, where building heights step up significantly as you move closer to the core around the future Cross River Rail station. There are already proposed and approved towers in Wollongabba ranging from the mid-20s up to the 30-plus story range, particularly closer to Main Street and Stanley Street. So while this proposal technically exceeds the 20-story guideline for this specific site, at 22 stories it would still sit well below some of the taller projects already shaping the broader Gabba precinct skyline. The bigger planning question will likely be whether the additional 2 stories are seen as a logical transition in scale, given the site's position opposite the Gabba and within walking distance of high-capacity public transport, or whether strict adherence to the precinct height map is enforced. Either way, it's another signal that the Gabba and Kangaroo Point interface is continuing to evolve from low-rise, car-dominated uses into higher-density mixed-use development. I'm also looking at doing some longer sit-down conversations alongside these updates, talking with people who understand how parts of Brisbane actually work, or who've been directly affected by the changes happening across Greater Brisbane. If you work in, around, or alongside these systems, or you've got lived experience that you think is often misunderstood, there's a short form I've linked below for you to express your interest in being in one of those conversations. You don't need any media experience, and you can remain anonymous if you prefer. This is still early days, but if you'd like to be part of those deeper conversations, I'd love to hear from you. And now to the Redlands. Macleay Island, a quiet bay island with a small residential community and limited commercial infrastructure, is now home to Queensland's first consulate for the Republic of Palau. Kevin Hughes has been appointed Honorary Consul General, with the consulate operating from his Heron Street residence. Palau is a Pacific island nation of around 18,000 people in Micronesia, roughly 800 kilometres east of the Philippines. The office will represent Palau's interests across Queensland, focusing on trade, tourism and cultural links, with freight pathways for Queensland produce identified as an early priority. For an island more commonly associated with ferry commutes and relaxed bayside living, it's certainly an unexpected development. Queensland's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade oversees recognition of foreign consular appointments in Australia, and while honorary consulates are typically modest in scale, this places Macleay Island on an unusual international map. If you're in Logan, the local update looks at council's crackdown on nearly 900 abandoned and derelict properties and what that could mean for housing supply and neighbourhood safety, along with progress on the Logan Indoor Sports Centre as demolition gets underway ahead of the 2032 Olympic Games. For Ipswich, there's a closer look at funding for a long-discussed second Bremer River crossing, new youth intervention programs aimed at reducing crime, and how smart parking technology and green waste reforms are changing day-to-day services in the CBD. And in Moreton Bay, we break down Bribie Island's new on-demand public transport trial, a key housing activation near Mango Hill Station, and construction beginning on the Suttons Beach Pavilion redevelopment on the Redcliffe Peninsula. You'll see all 3 updates on screen now if you'd like to continue with what's happening specifically in your area. If you want to stay across what's changing specifically where you live, those updates will take you straight into the local detail. Thanks for staying up to date. See ya.